Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
And today we have Luke Swinson. Luke is a visual artist with Anishinaabe roots and a member of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation.
We talk with Luke about his illustrations and murals, connected with nature and wildlife, and his desire to better understand his Indigenous culture. Oh, and we also talk about American comic book artist Jack Kirby.
That's true. We also kind of explore failure with Luke and what it's like to start over again and realize what your art looks like. Here he is, Luke Swinson.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Do you enjoy Bonn Park podcast?
If so, we would really appreciate it if you
Leave a review,
like, rate, subscribe, but most importantly,
share directly from the platforms
with your family and friends. That's the best way to get the word out to everybody, and more people will get to see our show that way. So click those like buttons and share our show. Thank you.
Thanks.
On with the show. This is it. Luke Swinson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're seeing your art around town. We're seeing your murals. One of my favorites is actually painted in the middle of the square in Waterloo.
Oh, yeah.
And my kids even recognized it right away. We also we've been going to Wordsworth Books uptown a lot lately during the lockdowns, and you have to drive down that back alley to pick up your purchases. And I was like, stop the car. I know what this is. I recognize this right away. There's two beautiful pieces on sort of roll up garage doors, I think they are.
Yeah.
And I took some pictures of those. Absolutely beautiful. We're loving seeing your work around town.
I love that people are associating those murals in the back alley with picking up books. I love it. Like, I love Wordsworth, so that's extra special for me.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, my kids have I've been calling them nerds, which is a term of endearment. I'm like, oh, you nerd, you're reading. I love it. They've gotten so bored during this past lockdown that they've started reading like crazy.
It's a good time to be a nerd right now, for sure.
Luke, I've always been a really big fan when it comes to visual arts. I've always, first and foremost, loved minimalism and simplicity. Mm-hmm. And you nailed it like nobody else I know. Like,
thank you.
Just nailed it.
Thank you.
Where did that begin? Where did you, in your artistic journey, kind of realize, wow, I can really strip these ideas down to something so simple and yet so powerful?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say a lot of it comes from my parents. My dad is an illustrator, graphic designer, and my mom is a florist. So they're both super creative. And I kind of grew up in an environment where minimalist design was the preference. And even influences beyond visual arts, like my parents loved, interior design, interior decorating, architecture, and having minimalist interior design magazines on our coffee tables all the time. Stuff like that really made an impact on me and my art, I'd say. I would say that I'm a minimalist, but I also like collecting things. So it's funny that my art doesn't always reflect who I am in real life. But I think that a lot of artists that I look up to have more minimal design sense. I was a lot of Indigenous artists just in general, like they just naturally have a more minimal design sense. One of my biggest influences, Norvell Morrisseau, was kind of the grandfather of the woodland art style. He had a huge impact on my art, especially when I started like that when I started, even just drawing simple animals, simple landscapes. A lot of that came from me just like going through books of Norval Morrisseau's art and other Indigenous artists. So yeah, I would say that my aesthetic comes from a lot of different places and avenues, definitely.
And I would say that you even brilliantly kind of walk this fine line between, in some cases, representational abstract and complete abstract. I'm talking about a piece I saw where it's antlers, but I don't. In the first few seconds, I don't see the antlers, right? Yeah.
That's a good description. That is not entirely intentional on my part, but I guess it sometimes just comes out that way. You know, I still consider myself a young artist and I'm still learning my style. And so it's funny that, you know, just subconsciously I flip-flop between sometimes even more realism actually, and super abstract. So yeah, that's interesting to hear that other people can see that as well.
One of the things that I really love is your work has a very traditional Indigenous art look to it, but it's not traditional in terms of these monochromatic color schemes that you're using are just so pleasing. And they just kind of make me feel warm and cozy
there's some really warm browns. And,
or sometimes even the blues and greens together, or, you know, it's just, it's so pleasing to look at and it's so cohesive. And what brought you to those color choices?
Kind of the same answer as before. Just, you know, I've accumulated a specific color preference or palette throughout my life, just from various places. But most notably my parents and also my sister. She's a musician, and, you know, just being in a creative family, stuff like color is like, it comes up, and, you know, it's one of those things I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly where that influence came from. But I guess just subconsciously I have, you know, a preference for more muted tones. And it is funny because growing up, two of my biggest artistic influences were Norval Morrisseau, as I said before, and Jack Kirby, who's a comic book artist. And both of them have the most vibrant color schemes in most of their art. Like those muted tones you see in my art is not reflected in their art. And so, yeah, I find it kind of funny that some of my biggest influences, you know, their palettes were entirely different than mine.
I'm a big comic book collector, so I'm a huge fan of Jack Kirby.
Oh, nice.
How did you discover Jack Kirby's work?
My dad was a Kirby collector when he was a teenager, and I don't know what happened, but his comic books got thrown out, and he was upset about it at one point in his life. So I think when I was young, he kind of wanted to live vicariously through me, and
as we all do with our children.
Yeah, totally right. That's what they're for.
That's right.
And so I started appreciating Jack Kirby's art, and, you know, his characters, his kind of vibrant worlds that he created. And I have a really fond memory of going to KW Bookstore downtown Kitchener, and they used to have these kind of low box shelves that were just packed full of comic books, just loose comic books. All of them were 25 cents each. And I would just sit on the floor. I was probably 9 or 10. I would sit on the floor and go through every single one of them, like just sit there for hours. My dad would just leave me. And I would pick out every Jack Kirby I could find. And yeah, I bought them all. So I have a pretty good Kirby collection. Kind of funny because they're actually worth a decent amount of money now, but not that I would ever sell. But yeah, I think that his art just stood out to me for various reasons. And, you know, I kind of like, I'm not much of a comic collector anymore, but when I try and seek out new comics or new artists, I usually try and find ones that were heavily influenced by Kirby as well.
And he worked across like a few genres of comic books. Which ones spoke to you?
I really liked his own characters that he created. I think let me see. Yeah, he did Commandy and Omak. Those are two characters that I really liked, that have never really seen the mainstream. It's kind of funny though, because now that comics and, you know, superheroes and stuff are more mainstream, that a lot of his characters and worlds are being picked up in movies and whatnot, which is obviously super exciting for me.
Yeah, we need to see a Commandy movie.
Yeah, is that a thing?
No, I'm.
Okay.
Yeah. I've never imagined. Yeah, it's pretty obscure.
I doubt that'll ever happen, but I think they're doing that in Eternals movie, right? And he had a big part of that.
The like Sarah was saying, your choice to not go with white negative space, rather a different color. I think that's really that really sets your work apart. But I see that you stick with that, what I consider this really powerful composition where you centralize the main subject in the work, right? That must have been something you saw early on too, where you thought, okay, I know what I need to do here to really kind of make it's almost symbolic the way you present your subject.
When I started with my current style, I think it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was really seeking out a style, really. Like I just didn't, I was kind of flip-flopping between doing charcoal realism portraits and just doodling, and I didn't really have a style. And when I started looking at other Indigenous artists and seeing what they were doing, I liked that a lot of their work was just a central figure, and it was kind of like they, even though it was really simple, they always had powerful meanings to them. When I started, it was kind of like I was just starting just at the very most simple beginning point, where it's like, okay, I want to draw an animal. I want to draw a bear. I think a bear was the first one I drew. And at the time, I was kind of also starting to learn Anishinaabe, which is my traditional language. And so they kind of went hand in hand, where I was like, what is bear in Anishinaabe? And it's Makwa. And so I drew a bear and I titled it Makwa. And that's kind of how the whole thing began. And ever since then, I'm still learning the language. I think that my art, I want my art to kind of be reflected in that learning process. And maybe the more I learn about my culture and my language, the more, subject matter, the more detailed my art becomes. I think I'll always have that preference for like a very simple minimalist design. But I do find that my art there's increasing meaning in my art over the years.
That relationship between your heritage and your art is part of your growth process, I suppose, is what we're saying here. That's such a beautiful thing. It makes me want to start drawing some stuff. I know that's not what you're doing, just drawing some stuff, but it makes me.
Oh, that is pretty much what I'm doing.
Can we, sorry, were you going to ask something?
I was going to ask about language.
Oh, go for it. That makes more sense than what I was going to say.
Can you tell us a bit more about language? Sarah and I were just talking a little while ago about how there have been, I guess, many Indigenous languages that were just verbal and not written down, and they disappeared over time. And when they're gone forever, right? Can you tell us a bit about your language?
Yeah, well, luckily, Anishinaabe is a massive language, and there's a lot of people that speak it. There are a lot of, being Anishinaabe and being in a heavily populated Anishinaabe area is beneficial for me learning, definitely. It is hard though still. Like I'm not good at learning languages, and it has taken me a long time. And especially since there are times in my life where I've just lost focus on it. More recently, I've started taking classes through my reserve. It's offering online courses, which is great. Kind of nice because I get to connect with people there and learn the language as well. It's hard. It's hard for someone who can't pick up languages well and also doesn't really have the opportunity to speak it to many people, because even though there's a lot of Anishinaabe people around, there's not that many fluent speakers. And there was kind of a realization years ago where I was like, if I heard Anishinaabe spoken on a bus in public, would I recognize it? And I wouldn't have, which is super terrifying to me. That's something that could mean so much to me and be so important to my people. I just wouldn't even recognize. And my community, Scugog Island, there's not many fluent speakers there. And so, we're doing great things to bring in fluent speakers and to teach young people the language. But it is kind of a struggle, honestly. But it's nice to have kind of this online, just kind of, I guess, to segue, it's kind of nice having an online community in Instagram, Facebook, to connect with other learners, and kind of like, share that common interest of art plus learning language.
Especially during this time when it's been hard to connect, right?
Definitely.
Have you thought of making like flashcards for children with like your art, maybe a word with like a phonetic spelling?
There's another artist that's doing something like that. And I think like he's reached out to me to ask if I could do some art for it. So I think that'll happen, whether it's my idea or someone else's.
That'd be great.
I think that would be really cool. Yeah. I could use those. So
see, I'm saying children. Yeah. I was just saying children, but I was like, maybe I would use Duolingo for French. I can't speak French, but I use it for French. And the pictogram part of it is very helpful.
It's great.
For me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
well, and especially like you said, a lot of Indigenous languages are oral. So it's like that relationship between pictures, like pictures are just so important, that association, definitely.
Your work, I think about how it lends itself well to being photographed, but when you do see it photographed, do you kind of see differences in it in terms of like color and things? You kind of go, that's interesting. I know myself, when you go to an art exhibition, you can look at the invite, an image on the invite, and then you get into the gallery and you're like, wow, that's different. You see these kind of things in your work, or does your work lend itself really, really well to being photographed accurately? I'm talking about color primarily.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, because a lot of my art is digital, right? So it's like I have so much control over what it looks like. Like a lot of my art, when it's photographed, it's just someone taking a picture of a print. But yeah, in terms of my paintings, like my public art, my murals, I haven't really had a problem with people photographing it and seeing any differences there. Like a lot of my murals are pretty simple. I'm just really focused on color and shape when I do public art. I think that's super important. Like I really appreciate the graffiti artists that just have like just such insane talent, and their use of spray paints and like detail is just ridiculous. I really appreciate that. But I do like very simplistic mural work. I think that it has the power to just stand out and make a statement with very little. And so, yeah, I think because of that, my art is pretty, it's pretty easy to take pictures of, I guess. Yeah.
Now you touched on it being digital. I want to geek out on process a little bit. Because you talked about starting with charcoal drawings. What are you using to create your work now? Are you starting with sketching? Are you in Procreate? Are you using Illustrator? Let's talk about the details of that.
Well, growing up around computers had, just a huge impact on me for many reasons, but especially with my art. My dad, we had Apple computers in our house since 94. And my dad was using computers to make art when it wasn't even really mainstream. It wasn't even a thing. Like, he jumped on that really quick. And so I always had that influence. And in high school, I think I failed 2 of my art classes, but they just put me through.
Sounds like me in my grade 10 math class.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't earn that 50.
No,
I know I didn't.
Yeah. And I love those teachers
too.
for it. But yeah, so I did not excel in traditional art class. And, it could have been an ego thing at the time. It could have just been me having a poor work ethic in high school. But when I had any sort of computer art class, or communications technology or anything that has to do with computers, I excelled at it. And I realized it's because I like it. I like doing it. So I try really hard at things that I like doing. And so that just kind of carried me. I went to Sheridan in Oakville for visual arts for a year, and again, did not excel. It's probably the same reasons I didn't in high school, but after that, I kind of just gave up on my art as a career goals and dreams, and kind of just did whatever. If I went to Conestoga for college for business and whatnot, but eventually, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, I circled back to computer art, and I bought an iPad. I started working in Procreate. I'm pretty good with Photoshop and Illustrator. I've been using them for a long time, but Procreate just gave me this kind of, I guess, ease of use. Like it would just felt like I was drawing on a sketch pad. And so, I started using that for pretty much everything. And to this point, I have this really wicked computer setup with like this really nice drawing tablet and everything, but I'm still sitting at my table with my my iPad thinking like, why do I have this sick setup if I'm not even using it? But
I hear you, but like that Procreate and the Procreate program and the pen response is so beautiful to use.
Unreal.
It's so smooth and it has so much texture. Like, why would you mess up with a good thing, or mess a good thing up, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And that is kind of a struggle for me, because I think that, not to get too much into the details, but I think that using a tablet, like a Wacom tablet on a computer using Photoshop, Illustrator, I think is extremely powerful. And I wish that was part of my workflow. And so it's like I acquired all this tech because I knew that was the direction I should go in, but I just can't do it. I just can't give up my iPad. And it's funny because like at this point, the iPad in Procreate is a professional tool. Like,
it is. Yeah.
Professional illustrators are using it the way that I'm using it. And so I feel less bad about it, but it's still something that I think that like eventually to start using everything in my arsenal.
I think if history with your high school art class and your program at Sheridan is going to prove anything, you shouldn't force it. It doesn't seem like you're a person who can handle like applied information. You need to find your own path. And if that's your path, then so be it. Anytime I use a tablet for photo editing, and anytime I've taught my kids how to use it, or actually I showed Marshall a few things in Photoshop, there is that time that you need to get used to the relationship between drawing in front of you and what's on screen. And that whole process is eliminated with the tablet and the pen when we're talking about using an iPad in Procreate. And it's real time, sort of right away. Where you really have to, when they're separated, you have to get used to that relationship between what you're doing down. I'm pretending to draw on the table for those audio listeners, what's happening down here and what's happening up on screen. It's a totally different, but it is powerful. You're right.
You have to kind of trick your brain. Yeah.
You do.
You get used to it.
We're going to take a moment to hear from this episode's sponsor.
Do you think you're brave? Think you're not afraid of things that go bump in the night? Prove it. Test your courage at Bingemans Green Park if you dare. Or do you think you might get the heebie-jeebies in the twisted maze that awaits you? Might you feel a tingle on the back of your neck as you trek through the dead marsh? There are creatures in those woods, you know. They can see you, but you can't see them. Not right away. Let's see how brave you are at the slaughter shed. Don't worry too much. If you just can't take the frights, you can calm your nerves and refuel at the Blood Bar. You may not be quite as brave as you think once you step in Scream Park. You've been warned.
Marshall, I know you and your family are big Bingemans Scream Park fans.
Yeah, I'm a huge horror fan. And Scream Park is hailed as Ontario's most terrifying outdoor attraction. And my family can vouch that it is indeed a haunting and ultimately delightful walk in the woods. And the creators of Scream Park have done such a remarkable job of creating an experience that feels simultaneously scary and safe, which I appreciate.
So if your family likes to be scared as much as Marshall's does, tickets and packages can be purchased online through bingemans.com.
Screaming season is here.
And now back to the show.
Luke, that Sheridan program is highly competitive to get into. You must have wowed them with the portfolio.
It actually wasn't. Like I just took Sheridan, a lot of visual art Sheridan programs, or just a lot of Sheridan programs in general, are super competitive. But I just took, like general, it was basically a foundational visual arts course. And I actually, before I went to that program, I applied for graphic design at Conestoga College, which is a very competitive program, hard to get into. And I was very disappointed because, like I said, I guess I had a bit of an ego. What was that? 13, 14 years ago. And I just kind of assumed I was ahead of the game and I could probably get into a program like that. They just turned me down. They they gave me some tough lessons. They said my work is too, they wanted to see progress work, and I'm not a sketcher. Like a lot of artists have sketchbooks, like shelves of sketchbooks at this point in their careers. I don't. I have finished work. I have a few sketches, I guess, but I just never was a sketchbook artist. And because of that, it's very hard to get into school because they don't care what your finished piece looks like. They want to see how you learn as an artist because, and my portfolio at the time coming out of high school was and they said this too, they said, you should probably consider industrial design, because at the time, most of my portfolio was product design. And like I had drawings of cars and furniture and buildings. And so I kind of got a tough lesson there. And I think I didn't want to go into industrial design because it's very math based, and I am not at all math based, and I don't ever want to be. So I didn't take their advice there. But I think at that point, I figured that I would just take a general art course just to kind of feel out the options and see what was right for me.
There's beautiful painting of a duck I saw of yours. And I've been going for walks really early in the morning at like 5:30 in the morning. And some pretty neat things happen at that time of day in the neighborhood. It's incredibly quiet. And also the ducks, the male and female, sometimes walk together on the sidewalk together like they're people, right? So you get really close looks at them, and they can just, when you get to see them up close, they can just really wow you, right? Like you feel like you know what a duck looks like, but there's, especially the male duck, you get up close to the colors in his head and you're just like, this thing just blows me away, right?
Yeah, they're beautiful.
And are there certain animals for you that really, especially like you never grow tired of seeing it? For me, I know like we have mourning doves and grackles visit our feeder, two very different kind of birds, but I never grow tired of seeing them. They're just gorgeous. Yeah. Are there certain animals for you that really speak to you?
Yeah, definitely. The blue heron, I think, is my favorite animal. And I actually just made a couple heron illustrations the other day, and in my caption I said I could never grow tired of illustrating these animals. And yeah, I just love, like, my partner and I go to Huron Natural Area in Kitchener a lot. Just such a beautiful natural setting. And there is a heron there, and we feel so lucky every time we get to see it. They're just such mysterious animals. It feels like such a treat when you get to see them kind of flying above the water. And they're just so beautiful and interesting looking. Almost like the way they move kind of reminds me of like a dinosaur or something. They're just really, they're big, their wingspan is huge, and they're kind of slowly flying. And yeah, they're such beautiful animals. There's so many, like I could, pretty much any animal that I've ever drawn I could never get sick of drawing any of them. I draw a lot of bears. I actually drew a Canadian goose late last year for Audubon in the States. They wanted me to draw. They gave me kind of a selection of animals to draw based on Audubon sold drawings, and I chose a Canadian goose. Because I think that they're such a polarizing animal. Like I don't know if it's just especially a KW thing. I don't think so, but people hate Canadian geese. They're just like, they're such a pest to people. But I find that so interesting because if you look at them closely, they're so beautiful. And if they weren't so protective, and if there wasn't so many of them, I think that people would look at them differently, right? They're big birds. The coloring is so nice. They're actually really beautiful. And so I have kind of like been on a goose kick lately, and just kind of trying to force myself to appreciate them a little bit more by drawing them, I guess.
I've never thought of them as a pest, but the way I see people driving around KW, I'm like, okay, well, we could let them cross the street at least. I'm pretty sure we're in their area.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we built a road in their natural path.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. We, Marshall and I had a work meeting yesterday. A Bonn Park meeting. We often walk the neighborhood because we were neighbors, and we saw an altercation between a blue heron and a pack of geese.
Whoa, really?
A pack of geese. What are they? A flock?
Flock, yeah.
We saw an altercation between a blue heron and a flock of geese.
Yeah, it was like he was provoking them.
He was. It was like he was teasing them just because he was bored.
What a badass.
No one got hurt, but he kind of wanted to let them know, like, I'm here,
Yeah, he kind of stretched through the water, kind
of walked towards them and then a little bit away, just teasing them a little bit.
I agree with Luke, though. There are two things. One is it's like looking back in time, like they're pretty prehistoric looking, right? And the other thing is I don't really understand them. Like they're always like alone, right? And,
always,
And the way that they soar over the fields and water is gorgeous, like you said. But I always find that odd when you see a whole pile of geese kind of looks like it's their territory, and then there's one blue heron just kind of hanging out, right?
Yeah. So tall, so beautiful.
Yeah, I bet you'll do an amazing job with those paintings. Is that what they are? Paintings? Yeah.
I was really interested to see, just switching gears here, the collaboration between you and your dad. I'm following your dad now, August Illustrated.
Yeah.
Is Luke's dad. Is this one of your dad's pieces behind you?
Yeah, it is actually.
Okay, I recognize it from his work.
Yeah.
It's very recognizable. It's absolutely gorgeous. So you guys worked on a mural in St. Jacobs together?
Yes.
Tell me about that project.
So the St. Jacobs BIA approached me about doing a mural. I think that they really like murals there. And I think that's a really cool way for them to kind of brighten up that space. So like, I love St. Jacobs. I grew up, going there on weekends with my family and walking along the water, going to Picard's Peanuts, just like, all the classic
the chip
things.
nuts. So good.
Yeah. Oh, so good, man. When you could just go in there and just like take samples of anything you wanted. Oh,
yeah. Nobody's doing that now.
Oh, I miss samples.
No, definitely not.
You know what else I like there? This has nothing to do with the peanuts, but the Lego candy. We always enjoyed the Lego candy. Yeah. They were fun.
Yeah, just destroying your teeth.
Yeah. Totally.
Or my joy is telling someone to try the habanero, fiery habanero chip nuts. Yeah.
But sorry, we digress. Let's go back to the mural.
So they approached me about that last year. And it's funny because it was my project, but I thought it'd be cool to involve my dad. Like, my dad loves St. Jacobs too. And, we usually work together on mural projects. Like, if he's doing one or if I'm doing one, we're kind of the extra hand painter. And so I proposed a few designs to them. And one of them was actually just straight up my dad's design. And they liked it. So we ended up doing, my dad ended up kind of like hijacking the project in a cool way. Like, I was happy that they selected his design because I thought it was perfect. Like, it was a literal drawing of the Conestoga River. And it was also every animal in that mural is one that we saw when we went to get inspiration for the mural. Like, we saw a heron, we saw a goose, we saw a duck. We went ahead with that, and it was super fun to do. We kind of did something different, and we did kind of like a landscape mural backdrop, and then we cut out plywood in the shape of the animals, and then fastened it to the wall, and so it kind of gives like a bit of a 3D effect to it. I really like that, actually, and I think I want to use that method for other projects, because when you're working on an uneven wall, sometimes the image that you want doesn't come out as clean as you want it to. Like, we were working with a wall that had these divots, every few inches, and being able to fasten just like plywood onto the wall just gives it that punch, and you don't have you just have a flat surface to paint on. And so we kind of experimented with that job, and we had a lot of fun doing it together. It's cool to see people's reaction, because people are very protective of St. Jacobs, especially their older population there. And we had a lot of people stop by and show their appreciation for it, and no negative comments yet. So yeah, it was a good time.
I really love those animal shapes and the 3D feature that it adds to it. It's just something special. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you reflect on your place here in Waterloo Region as an Indigenous artist? And it's pretty clear to me that you're very much inspired by the space you're in. And then that's a beautiful idea that you create a mural, which is in itself a gathering space. It's unique, right? Yeah. And it's kind of like this really beautiful give and take.
When I was growing up, I didn't see much Indigenous representation in KW. My Indigenous community was on Scugog Island, where my family is. And, I'm mixed. So it's like I was living my, my Caucasian life here, and then my Indigenous life there. And that just didn't work for me. I wasn't learning anything. I wasn't learning language or culture. I wasn't, taking part in anything important. And so now that I'm older, I love that I am able to create space for young Indigenous people that may be feeling the same thing. If I saw a giant heron in a clearly Indigenous style on the side of a building, I think that would have inspired me when I was much younger. I think that I would say that my art career might have started a lot earlier than it did. And so I want my my kind of like placemaking mural efforts to have that effect on young Indigenous people. And yeah, KW is just, it's exciting for me because I'm starting to connect with the Indigenous groups that are here. A lot of them are based around the schools, unfortunately. If you don't go to, Laurier, UW, Conestoga, you're kind of missing out on those really like stellar Indigenous groups. But there is more of a movement lately. There's more events going on. My partner, Alana, she goes by Morningstar Designs, also an Indigenous artist. And, she works for the city and she's doing all these things, all these efforts to make space for Indigenous people and, just have representation. And so it's a really amazing time, I guess, in KW for Indigenous people and for me. And I no longer feel that I need to, fly away home or, move to Toronto or go somewhere with more of an Indigenous population. And it's kind of a bummer because of the pandemic. Like I just started to go to events and take part in circles and ceremony. And then it was just, everything was cut short, unfortunately, but things are starting to ramp up again. And hopefully that can happen soon.
Hey all, thanks for meeting us in Bonn Park. Please like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on the platform that you're listening to. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bonn Park Podcast. Original music by Alan Lung.